Hey, how's it going? So yeah, I get this question a lot if I'm out flying or whatever. Um, they're like, "What is that thing? Is it a plane? What what is that?" It's an FPV drone, and I don't know. I wanted to talk a little bit about it today with my low production quality video here. So, what is an FPV drone? Um, I have these little cue cards that are probably just gonna screw me up more than anything. But an FPV drone, and I apologize for the messy desk. It's always messy, so whatever. Um, an FPV drone or quad. It's FPV stands for first person view, and a drone is a multi-rotor vehicle or a VTOL, vertical takeoff and landing craft that uses motors to basically stabilize it, and I'll get into that more later. But what an FPV drone basically lets you see what the drone sees. So the drone has a little camera in it, and that helps you see what the drone sees. And yeah, maybe I should just read my notes. It stands for first person view. Uh, it can be many different configurations. It can be a quad rotor, a hexcopter, a eight hex, I don't know, the hex octocopter, or an X8 where it's almost like a quad that has another quad upside down. So it has motors on. It has a lot of motors, and it can lift a lot more stuff. But so the more motors you have, the more stuff you can lift. But here, we're just going to talk about the basics. It can be viewed remotely, usually has some kind of video transmitter, VTX. It's usually on 5.8 gigahertz, the analog. DJI uses 2.4 gigahertz, but we're not going to really talk about that. We're just going to talk about analog. Yeah, they're controlled with basically RC hardware that's been around for a long time. It's just a newer, more potent, better version of it. It's basically hobby grade stuff that's been in like RC cars, RC planes, RC gliders, that kind of stuff. And just recently, with things getting smaller, they've been able to make more things like drones and stuff like that. And I'll talk about that more later. Yeah, it's basically many different generation technologies working in unison, and I think that's why I like it the most. It's like all these different things wrapped up into one. Wireless transmission, remote control. Um, it's it's basically all the things we use, like Wi-Fi and that kind of stuff, working in a different way. But anyway, now that you know that FPV stands for first person view, um, I think I'll tell you a little bit about how it works and how a drone, the basics of a drone. Um, so, vertical takeoff and landing is really nothing new. Back in the like 50s and 60s, the U.S. military was testing a ton of different aerospace technologies, like man, my thing is gonna die. All these different aerospace technologies, and VTOLs were one of it. Vertical takeoff and landing. Um, but they ran into a bunch of problems with them, and they basically scrapped the program back in the day. And I mean, they're opening it up now. They have military drones and stuff like that in recent years, but back in the day, it was costly. They lacked microcontrollers. Those are the little computers that make the drone work or make the VTOL stabilize. And they usually were made by like jet or like companies backed up by gas companies, and they were trying to use like basically make an airplane hovercraft thing with airplane technologies. And they came up with, there's all these videos on VTOLs and stuff like that. And just in recent years, with microcontrollers getting smaller, they've been able to put gyroscopes and stuff like that inside the drone. I should probably have made a little thing about that too. But they can stabilize smaller craft now, and they couldn't do that, you know, like 20 years ago, 30 years ago. And yeah, that's basically why VTOLs were big back in like the 60s, and then they stopped making them for a while, and now it's just starting to ramp up again. That's why you're hearing drones everywhere and stuff like that. The technology's getting better. They're able to do a lot more things now than they did back in the day. So yeah, what is an FPV drone? The FPV drone is like some basic things. It has a here's my little diagram here. That's actually a side view of a drone, if you can imagine. They usually have a let me get one for reference. I don't know where, they're all over the place, but I can't find them. So an FPV drone, it has, in the front of it, it has a camera. That's the camera right there. In the middle of it, it has something called a stack, and that's just a cool name for a bunch of circuit boards put on top of each other. It has the bottom, well, normally you have a speed controller, an ESC, electronic speed controller, and the speed controller talks to a flight controller, and the flight controller, I guess the flight controller talks to the speed controller, but the flight controller has a gyro on it, and that's what keeps it stable, and it talks to the speed controller and lets it know to turn these motors a certain way to get them to stabilize this craft. Now, I don't know if you noticed, but these props, one prop, this one's going this way, this one is going this way, so they're turning, yeah, they're turning into each other. I don't know if you can see that. So this prop is turning, this prop is turning, and they turn, and when they turn into each other like that, they're actually creating like forces that keep this thing stable or moving forward or whatever direction you want to go. I don't know if you can see my little diagram here, but it has 4 motors. A basic quad or a basic VTOL has 4 motors, and they spin. See, these spin clockwise. This one spins clockwise. This one spins counterclockwise, and those opposing forces make this thing go forward, back, whatever direction in space and time. And yeah, basically, this is the basics of what is in a drone. It has a camera, it has a stack, which is basically like circuit boards that control everything. It has a VTX, which is a video transmitter, video TX. TX is just transmit. It's like the abbreviation for transmitter. So camera, stack, VTX. It has a battery to power everything. It usually has an antenna away from the frame, so it gets better range. And yeah, and then it has 4 motors, and those motors, like I said, they oppose, and they keep that thing going in space and time. Yeah, there's just another diagram of it. You can see that's a common, this is quad X config in a lot of programs like Betaflight, Clean Flight, RGU Pilot, I don't know, there's just a bunch of them. This is quad X config. It's just like kind of like a standard they've come up with. Motor number 4, 2, 3, 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. It's just the way they number them. You can actually do it different ways, but this is the most common way to do it. It has a counterclockwise. Counterclockwise are usually across from each other, and those opposing things keep it stable and keep it flying. Yeah. Anyway, got my little cue cards here. I don't know, I like drawing stuff. It helps me see, or it helps me keep everything together. And I'm going to try to keep this as short as possible. But here's the basic FPV setup. I don't know if you can see here, you have your drone, and then you have your little guy here with his FPV goggles on, or FPV screen if that's what you like to do. Either one works fine. And then he has a transmitter, or the controller, and it's probably more confusing than anything, but the FPV goggles are talking to the drone, and then the transmitter is talking to the drone, and these two kind of work together, because you can fly the transmitter, you can fly the drone without the goggles, but if you want to fly FPV, you need to see what the drone sees. So you have basically two separate streams of information or data or whatever you want to call it coming out of the drone and going back into the drone, and that's how you control it. Your transmitter controller usually operates at 2.4 gigahertz. The DJI ones, I think they go at 5 gigahertz, and